I'm going to be talking about dyeing gold here in a minute. Two ways to paint value gradations and color gradations, and there's two ways to get it in a container. Value gradations, these are larger pieces of fabric. I was getting ready to do a quilt, and I do have swatches. I've cut off the corner of each one with a recipe, but basically they're all in different containers, and each one is diluted with water, so they come out kind of even. You can also do the same thing with dye painting. You mix a color and gradually add print paste to lighter, and look at the lightest value down here. Here's a little silk quilt I painted years ago, and it was a workshop in values, and I decided I wasn't going to do piecing, but I made it look like a piece quilt. It's a whole cloth with values of gray painted on. You can do the values in separate containers. These are all fat quarters, all ready to go. She's dyed them. She's probably scrunched them up and waiting to wash them. And you can do different values on the same piece of fabric. So you could put more dye on one end and spread it down and get lighter values at the other end. These are t-shirts. And you can also spread the dye by hand. I had the fabric was wet in soda ash, and I spread the blue on, light blue, and I'm going back and adding darker blue. And I'm working it over and over because I'm seeing bubbles, air bubbles, and I'm getting rid of the air bubbles, adding more color and spreading it out. And of course, it's wet. So I already have to have in my mind that when it's dry, it'll be a lot lighter. It's quite a versatile way to do it. I am using a single chemical blue. If I were to do this with a mixture of blue and another color, I might have the other color might fix sooner than the blues. Here is me doing this on a 120-inch square piece of fabric for the back of a quilt. I wanted sky, and I wanted a big sky. And I did some practicing for this, and I worked fast as I could. This light blue area here is sunlight coming in the room. Here is the back of the quilt with the blue sky on it. I added these other colors after that photograph. And the lower part of the quilt is painted with thickened dye. So I just got a brush out and I painted a charcoal color on. I didn't want it to show through the front. If it had been really black, it would have shown through. Here's the front of the quilt. And all of these grays were mixed and then diluted to get different values. You can see there's printed and overprinted and printed again. And there was a little bit of my favorite resist. It's called corn dextrin. I probably put the corn dextrin on first, and then I added so a little bluish gray and yellowish gray and rollers. And it was hand quilted by the Oswego quilters. I marked it and they quilted it for me. Okay, so here's a 8-foot piece of cotton, and I mixed up about 4 values of blue with thickener, and I laid down pieces of ripped newspaper and rolled over it. And in some places you see this may have been the color I was on the roller, but when it overlapped another stroke of it, it came out darker. So you have to remember that dyes are transparent. So here I was getting lighter and lighter values, but I had to be careful because if I rolled over and over and over again, I would have made that spot darker and darker. And here was a piece like I was doing the blue. It was with grays, but while it was wet, I put strings with thickened dye on it. And while it was wet, the dye was thickened. It held its line, but it smeared a little bit and bleeds out. So if you want to do a color gradation, You would do the same thing as a value gradation, except you change the color every time you put it in the basin. This is 3 different colors in a gradation, warm tans, and these are the cooler tans that I did for a quilt. If you want to dye paint a color gradation, you can take one of the primaries or any color you want, and you'd add a tiny bit of the other color to it, and then a tiny bit more and a tiny bit more, and you gradually can grade down. I was just mixing this brightest yellow with the brightest blue for this sample. You can imagine doing that on a fat half or even on a whole yard of fabric with a 4-inch sponge brush. It'd be very easy to get a lot of graded colors that way. Here's a classroom, people practicing and learning how thick to make it so it doesn't bleed out of the edges. You can also do a color gradation in one container. You can put a different color at every level. You can do it subtle. Here she had lots of different colors, but they'll mix a little bit where they touch. I'm just going to let this run. I'm talking. This is taken straight out of my DVD, and I cut it down to as short as I could to show you exactly how to do a gradation of colors and those colors in the cheese. Each of these containers already has a cup of water on it. They're already wet and pressed in so the dye will flow into the folds. I'm going to put a cup of dye on the first piece. That's what color I have. And I'm going to press it in right away because the dye finds, locates itself, and likes to stick right where you put it. I can feel a big lump here. I'll spread it out a little bit, but basically these folds are going to create the texture in the fabric. And I'm going to let that sit while I do the next piece of fabric. So, but I want to change the color. I think I will add a half a teaspoon to the next color. So I will pour the yellow dye into my cup measure and add a half a teaspoon. Is going to be really drastic. The way I'm going to decide this is I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of the violet. See what it did to the color by putting it on here. This would be my second color. That's different enough. 1/4 teaspoon added to my base color. Pour that on here. These are colors in a relationship that it would be very hard to find to buy in the store because there's going to be a slow change. It isn't too hard to replicate this. If you've done it once, you see the colors. You can remember that you used a strong gold and violet. And then how much? That's the question. You need to know how much of the complement to add to change that color. And what you see here is all the dye and water only with the fabric. And the dye is penetrating and soaking in. And I usually wait anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. Normally, that's just the basic low water method. And then I add the soda ash. Now I'm going to add the soda ash right now because we've got things to do. Every yard of fabric has a cup of water on it and a cup of color and then a cup of soda ash. You see a dramatic change of color, which will calm down and go away. Scary. I don't want orange. I'll wash all these and show them to you later. I do want to make sure the soda gets in to all the folds. So this is the color gradation that I did in 4 separate containers. I started with a gold and I added little bits of violet. In fact, I added a 1/4 teaspoon of violet to each of these golds. I was able to get a very, very subtle change. And let me show you the difference. To me, a very useful fabric. And it's stirred minimum, it's just the basic method, and washed thoroughly. the last step. This is one part of a demonstration from my video. The chapter on color mixing has several different demonstrations, and this one about mixing color gradations is 12 minutes long, and it is on my website for you to look at whenever you want. If it's on my website, you can share it with anybody who wants to know. What I want you to watch it for is to see how I decide what the color is that I'm going to get when I'm dyeing this fabric. Because the reason back in that log cabin, I put dye in a bucket. I never knew what color it was going to be. You can't tell by looking in a bucket of liquid what color is going to come out of there. So this kind of demonstrates, and throughout the whole video, that's what I do, is I show you ways of mixing it and looking at it without having a recipe, because the recipes, they are different every time. One drop of yellow will change the whole color. I just wanted to show you this, get a good smile out of it. I did all the entire DVD, all of the hours of filming in my sewing room, because they liked, I had more space for the cameras and the lights. I didn't do it in my dye studio. I did it in my sewing room with my wood floors and so on. And I had to insist, he said, well, let's get some photographer's paper up here and put it behind you. And I said, no, let's use hand dye fabric. And they put the dinosaur up there for me to remember to smile. So you can dye fabric any way you want to if you cure it and then you wash it in really hot water. Whatever you have, that's what you've got. If it's faded or light or something, then you have to look at your questions why. You notice the colors here on this piece of, I don't know, that looks like a paper towel, but I would recommend always having a piece of cotton ready to drop the color on to see what's going to go onto the main piece of fabric. So there's lots of ways to do this. These dyes are versatile, and there are more recipes to use these exact same dyes. Some of them involve steaming. Some of them involve different reasons for working different ways. For example, when I put the soda ash in my dye thickener, I might do that every once in a while. There are variations for silk. They're very versatile. But I've pretty much focused on what is easiest for me to do all at once in one place in my studio. Sometimes something looks really complicated and it isn't. This is one person. This is a photograph of a person swinging a sparkler. I mean, it's nothing big, but it's spectacular for being simple. Anyway, that's what I think about the dyes. And here is the pink door. I love this door. I don't even know where I took this picture, but I thought it would be a easy way for you to find. The place on my website is on the front page. All the resources I've mentioned are up there, and everything's in my books.